Welcome to this week's episode of the DDT Method Podcast. Today we have a very special episode for you guys. We have Ken Skip Hill here. Now, Skip Hill is somebody that if you're a younger guy in the industry and maybe you're just scanning through social media and you're getting all your information from Reels and YouTube, well, first and foremost, I'm making this to try and educate you guys specifically. But second of all, you might not know who he is if that's the case, but if you've been around the sport for a little while, and if you're somebody that's watching this that is somebody in the sport, then you definitely know who Skip is. Skip's one of those guys that if you're somebody that people knows, you know Skip. And hopefully if you're watching this in general, you do. But if you don't, today we're going to go over Skip's background and longevity in the sport and some of his unique methods to training, not only for just competitive bodybuilding, but for any recreational gym rat that wants to put on size, get shredded, and do all the things that we're all after doing. Without going too long-winded with the intro, Skip, tell us a little bit about yourself. What got you into training and then what took you into bodybuilding?
I don't know. I kind of liked how it was going there with you because it's easier to listen to someone say what I've done versus me saying it. I feel sometimes like that dinosaur that Barney Rubble slides down when he's done working at the quarry. And even that reference, there would be the next generation go, what is he talking about? Like
half of them have never seen that. Exactly.
My parents watched that cartoon. I've never seen that cartoon. Anyway, now, 41 years now of training. Turned 55 here. I'll be on stage this year. Finally, at 55, there've been some pretty rough roadblocks. But things are going great. I've been training, people online for 23, 24 years back to 2001. Prior to, I always laugh and say when people say, well, I've been training people online for 20 years. Your mom and your sister, they don't really count. Like you actually have to be training people that are actually going to get on stage. But, I'm one of the few who can kind of catch them on that because I've been around so long that we kind of knew who the trainers were back in the days. I started on the message boards. So I've got pretty thick skin. People get tired of hearing that, but that's the reality of it. So message boards were just a different, demographic, a different planet, if you will. Social media is much, much kinder when there's that lack of anonymity. So I've trained people in all different divisions. There's so many things that I'm the dinosaur. I've been around for a while.
I feel like the message boards were so different, like you said, in that it was almost like this exclusive club where the information was not necessarily filtered, but filtered through differently. And it was really quick, or people were really quick to kind of throw out the garbage. Now, if people are watching this and the message boards were before their day, they probably heard people talk about the message boards, about the professional muscle, about intense muscle, even bodybuilding.com back in the day. Sure. Like the steroid section was a pretty gnarly source of information. But tell us a little bit about that. Like, what was the atmosphere there and who were some of the people there and what were you guys talking about?
Well, I only know people based on their member names, which is kind of funny because then years later I meet them and I don't know their names, Ron or Mark or anything else. It's, too big to be too arrogant to be swole, or I don't know, or too arrogant to be, I think weird things. Dante started with dog crap. So there was dog crap and then I had to go to DC training. Didn't think that was going to be a very good marketing method, which maybe it was quite wrong. But anyway, the message boards were cool in the sense, I explain it like this. It was a bro community that people wanted to be a part of. So most times, with the exception of Get Big and, just troll boards, you didn't want your reputation behind that fake name was important to you because you either built respect with the way you interacted and the information that you gave or the way that you debated, or you just were considered a moron and it mattered to people. The other thing that's important to note as a difference between the message boards and social media is you didn't have control over getting rid of the people or not interacting with the people that you didn't want to interact with unless you just left or you got banned. And really to be banned on the message board, it was a pretty big deal. Like that's like being, ousted from the church if you're a Christian or, something. It's like, oh my good, and then try to come back in under a different name and still get busted because we were living on these boards. So you may have a different name, but we're going to see with the style, of the way that you're communicating and the way that you type and the way that you speak, your syntax and that sort. We're going to pick it up and be like, bro, no, it's too powerful for you. Get out. That sort of thing. So it mattered. The reputation mattered. And it was just the best exchange of information because it wasn't the echo chamber. You know, Adam McVeigh, we didn't always see eye to eye, rarely, actually. Very difficult guy to get along with. But he did say something once that initially I disagreed with. And he was one of the first ones to go echo chamber, echo chamber, echo chamber with social media. And then I realized that really he was right. You can say anything on social media, almost anything, and your minions will agree with you. And if they don't, then you just get rid of them. That's really how it works these days. If you're going to counter or argue with me or debate with me, I'm not even going to debate with you. I'm just going to block you. And that's when the quality of information really goes in the toilet. Not only is it bad, but with the advancements with social media and technology itself, the online, all these platforms, there's just massive amounts of information that in the 80s, I would have loved as a teenager to have all this access. At the same time, double-edged sword, you have all this really good information, you have all this really shitty information. And you have to figure out what's good and what's bad. And people coming into the sport or just starting to work out, they don't know what's good or bad. And followers mean very little. There's still a connection, but you're going to have a lot of people giving bad information who are really good at marketing and promoting. And they know a lot of the back end as far as analytics and a lot of the computer social media type stuff. And then when it gets down to that experience and that knowledge, track record, a lot of times it's not there. Take the big guys in the industry who have been big for a long time. They don't have this massive, 1 million reach, 500,000 people reach. That's not typically the case. It's the very, very mainstream fitness people who will hit that grand slam from a follower, monetizing standpoint. And the rest of us are kind of like, man, we got a lot of information. And it's hard for people like myself who've been around for a long time. And this is my ego. I'll admit it. I put it out there and I own it. But when I hear things that I have said 15, 18, 20 years ago, or someone else that I consider a well-respected peer has said, and someone else has regurgitated that, and then all of their followers jump up, oh, you're a genius. I never would have thought of that. I've never heard. And they give zero credit, Drew. It's just the most bizarre, narcissistic, egocentric type situation. It blows my mind. And my wife reminds me, she's not in the bodybuilding industry. She has like a regular job. She's a normal person. And she says, don't kid yourself, Ken, because she refuses to call me Skip. That's the difference between business and knowing me personally. If I walk down the street and someone calls me Ken, I immediately know without recognizing them. I'm like, oh, they know me from school or they know me for a long time. They say Skip, they know me from the industry. And she says, Ken, every industry is like that. It's not just bodybuilding. It seems like it is to me because that's what I live and breathe for the last, I'd say 40 years, but at least online for the last 24, 25 years.
Now, what really bothers me about that type of occurrence isn't necessarily kind of the ego thing, because I didn't invent anything, and I haven't been the first person to put anything out, I guess you could say. So it's not like it hits me personally, but what bothers me is that we're in a time in the industry where really nobody's going to make up anything. And it's been like that for a long time. So there's this weird connection that newer coaches or trainers tend to have, or just influencers, if you want to use that title, where they seem to think that giving credit where it's due is going to diminish their knowledge or their value as a coach or somebody that's worth money. As if you say like, hey, like we're going to take an approach called skip loading, that the person's going to instantly go, well, wait a minute, that's somebody else's. I'm going to fire you and go hire them.
Right.
Maybe that would happen once in a blue moon, but situationally, people need to understand that nobody has really invented anything, at least not for a long time. And specific methodologies and approaches to things, maybe you just have a unique way of doing a drop set that really beats the crap out of somebody and you use it at the right time and it ends up being efficacious. Maybe if you want to make that yours, cool, go for it. But I can't for the life of me think of a situation where somebody has credited somebody else and then lost their own credibility based on it. It's usually the opposite. The person will just gain credibility. I'll notoriously tag other coaches in posts that I put online just because I find it to be endearing when I see somebody that's done their research and talks to other people and learns everything like that. So we're in this weird situation now where people can just take credit for this and kind of get away scot-free because like you were saying, that echo chamber exists and nobody's correcting it, as opposed to the days of the message boards where within 15 minutes, 15 guys would be like, yeah, you're full of shit. This is so-and-so's. Here's the proof. How do you recommend that somebody that's at a beginner or intermediate level that's really trying to take things to the next step, like how do you choose who to follow, who to pay attention to, who to actually deem as credible?
You know, that's a tough question to answer, if I'm being honest. Really what it comes down to, I think, from a sensical standpoint, you know, I'm going to listen to somebody who has a lot of experience, has just done it for a long time. And people may be listening going, oh, well, of course, because that's you, Skip. Fair enough. But logic dictates that if I've trained thousands of people under thousands of different types of situations with tens of thousands of different variables, it would kind of make the average normal person think, okay, he is going to know or should know more about things than the person who is just starting out. Now, it can also be argued that sometimes, and it happens, sometimes trainers who've been around a while become a bit complacent and they just kind of ride on what they knew 15, 18, 20 years ago. That can happen as well, no question. I just still say that if and I did it for the first time ever, and I haven't put this out there yet publicly, at least who it is, so I'm not going to do that now because that'll happen this weekend. But I did hire I reached out to someone who I have a ton of respect for, and I'm going to work with someone to prep me so that I can hand the control over to somebody. I always took huge pride in the fact that I've never worked with anyone. Now, I'm not saying that's great and I'm better or a better trainer or a better person for doing that. What I'm saying is I've always approached bodybuilding as this very singular endeavor. And that's kind of a slap in the face to my wife of 33 years and the people who have supported me for a long time. But they know that I don't mean singular in the sense that I don't give them credit for being an incredibly massive support network. What I'm saying is I just haven't relied on anyone else as far as my success or my failure when it comes to bodybuilding. I feel like, look, I'm either going to succeed and do well on my own, or I'm going to fail and fall on my ass on my own. And at least I know that I did it. I used to love baseball, played baseball, lived and breathed baseball. And it would drive me nuts because I caught, and I would go 3 for 4, throw 2 guys out at second, might pick one from my knees, you know, that type of thing. And then the clown in center field would drop a routine fly ball that would allow 2 runs and we'd lose the game. And things like that used to drive me nuts. I'm not a team player. I've been married for 30 some years, so I guess I'm a team player in that sense. Pretty good father. We've raised 4 kids. My kids, I think, would say the same thing. But I'm not a team player when it comes to bodybuilding and that. So I want to succeed or fail on my own. So it's difficult, but I reached out to someone to help me to do that, who I trusted. And who did I go with? I went with someone who I don't have to question whether they're going to have my back. I don't have to question which basically comes, you know, their integrity, their character. But I also don't have to question their experience. They've been in the game. This guy's been in the game a long time. I can now hand over the control where I thought I was going to be stressed and anxious. And it's this giant sigh of relief. I did not think that's how it was going to work, but that's how it works. So if I'm going after someone with that experience and with that knowledge and that, you know, incredible track record, I would assume that other people would want to do the same thing.
Now, what changed? Because you explained why you hadn't used a coach before, but why is now different?
I had to really come to grips with some shit, if you will. The short version is this. I'll be 55 in a couple weeks. When I turn 50, it's COVID, 2020, and I work from home. So COVID really didn't bother me. I have all my groceries delivered. I could train at gyms in the middle of the night. I was driving to Miami every night, training at 2 a.m. because I trained a pro who owned a gym down there. Awesome gym, by the way, Iron Temple. It depends on the type of gym you like, but if you like hardcore, dirty, not dirty like it's unclean, but rusty, just a dungeon type of gym, swamp cooler in Miami, no air conditioning. I mean, are you kidding me? This is your place. I wish I was closer. We moved to West Palm. I can't drive down there now. It's just way too far. But anyway, I was in 2020 and things were going great. And I was going to do Masters Nationals and I got about 6 weeks out. And of course, probably that the shows that year started to be pushed because it depended on the state and especially the bigger shows, whether those shows were even going to happen or not. But they kept pushing them 5-6 weeks, at a time. Mm-hmm. Had the show happen when it was supposed to happen, I wouldn't have ended up with a torn glute. So I tore my left glute, which then in turn caused, because of favoring that side for 5 months, just walking around trying to rehab and live life, it caused articular cartilage damage in my right knee that took 2.5 years to fully rehab. When I was told by 2 specialists, you might as well come up with something else to do. Thankfully, they told me that because it devastated me for about 15 minutes. And then I got pissed and I thought, you know what? I've been doing this a long time. I'm going to rehab from this. I don't know how, but I'm going to. So after coming back from that, and then of course you're rehabbed and I'm like, oh my gosh, my knee's 100. This is crazy. Well, you got to get all that leg size back that you didn't have before. And it's a little harder to do when you're in your 50s versus your 30s. And you still have the injury. You're compartmentalizing it as best you can, but it's there. So every time I do a leg exercise or a set, I'm thinking, my knee up? My knee up? That took almost a year. So there've been a few hurdles. And when I was finally 100%, I went to prep this last year. And it was my own head, my own psyche. My expectations, unfortunately, were what they were when I was in my 30s. And I couldn't adjust to the fact that you have to accept that even though you're really good for being in your 50s, and I think that I can battle at that high level. I really do. I've seen other people battle. I've seen other people come away with pro cards. I think I can get in there. I can mix this up. And I've asked a few people close to me and they're like, yeah, you can battle for this. But then I drive myself into the ground doing things. I make horrible decisions that I've never made prepping myself in the past. And I had to try to figure out what that was. And really what it comes down to, and this is my best guess because we never really know if we're just justifying things or if we're really being honest with ourselves. But it's a pretty honest assessment to basically just say the expectations I had on myself are too high. And I assumed that everybody else's expectations for me were going to be high. So I was thinking, I don't want to get on this stage. And God forbid, people are going, oh, he's just, he's okay. He's good. He's still killing it. Ooh. And get those patronizing comments. You see people, I see people, and a lot of times they're older and they are a bit disillusioned as to how they really look. And it's bizarre. I didn't want to be that guy. So what do bodybuilders typically do? When in doubt, train more. When in doubt, do more cardio. When in doubt, suffer, grind. The more you suffer. And then it's to the point where I'm warming up with 135 on the Smith to squat. And I get to 185 and I'm hitting 7, 5, 6, 7 doesn't want to go all the way up. And I'm barely getting to, I dug a hole that was going to take a while to get out of. I was in great condition. I probably was at 6-8 weeks from what I thought. And this was backed up by the guy that I'm now working with this year. But I tried to reset. I even said, I'm going to push for another show. I asked him. He's like, yeah, but then you're going to be on cycle for 11 months. What if you're not 100% and you've now gone the whole year? Let's pull out, let's reset, and let's go fresh for 2025. And at least that way, win, lose, or draw, you know you were 100%, and then the chips fall where they may. Maybe you get your ass kicked. Maybe you rock the stage and you win the class. So we're gonna find out finally. But that's what it was. It was just a lot of head games and a lot of that self-imposed pressure. And why? I was never a high-level bodybuilder when I was younger. I've always said I'm a mediocre bodybuilder at best. I will win the class if everybody else shows up and is mediocre. I'll beat him on condition. I'm never going to beat him on structure, and I'm never going to beat him on size. So hopefully I end up doing the same thing and I show up and and I feel that I will be absolutely shredded. And what's that do? Not only do I find out where I stand as far as on the bodybuilding stage, but we'd both be denied. And if we didn't admit that feeds the machine too, as far as business, and people go, oh, okay, Skip's still relevant after all these years. He's still killing it for 55.
I'm very excited to see how this goes. And that's really just a testament to the fact where we're never in a spot where we're not learning something. Now,
right.
You working with somebody might not necessarily be you taking a course on mitochondrial health or whatever is most popular right now, or just reading about the newest developments in pharmacology. You don't need to do those things. But in this case, it's somebody watching what you're doing that can learn your body, or that already knows your body, that in this particular case, it looks like they know more when to kind of pull you back, and they can be that observer. Exactly. So
pull back on the reins. Yep.
So at no level are any of us really in a point where we can't benefit from the help or the insight of others. And that goes from situations like this to situations of coaches that are in their late 20s, early 30s that are still trying to do it based on watching a YouTube video and not actually trying to learn anything. And that doesn't necessarily have to be like higher education or even a certification. It can be working with a mentor or working with a coach exclusively to learn. We always have all these avenues open to learn, and people just don't take advantage of that. Now, one thing that I've always been impressed at is you say you're a mediocre bodybuilder. I say you're somebody that's been doing this at a high level for a long time. It's your longevity in the sport. So what are some of the things you did? Let's focus on this knee injury. Like, what are some of the things that you did to get back to a place where you feel like you can go as close to 100% as possible?
A lot of trial and error. That's number one. And if you think about it, isn't that at its core the nature of what we do anyway? Whether we have a trainer, are a trainer, we're just a bodybuilder. This is just a massive science experiment, an individual science experiment with every single one of us. If you have the ability to come away and you're able to to assess the different variables and the changes that you make, maybe you're a better scientist / bodybuilder than the next guy. Some people don't want to think about it. They just want to bang and they want to do what they're supposed to do. And you know what? They'll take the gains as they come. That's fine. I'm way too competitive with myself. Never mind the stage. I'm OCD in a sense that when everything is in its place, I always laugh at it, and my wife says the same thing. When I control my bodybuilding world, I don't have to control everything else around me. So it makes for a good marriage if you have control of the thing that isn't really dysfunctional versus wanting to control everything else that's around. When I'm not training, I'll be honest, I'm a mess. I'm a mess in the sense that everything is not in its place. I used to say, I'm not a body, but that's just a part of what I do. And then I realized, yes, it's a part of what I do. Obviously, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a lot of other things. The problem is without bodybuilding as my therapy and my outlet, I'm a giant mess. I probably would be unhealthy. I do like to eat. I'm a foodie at heart. If you ever come to South Florida, I will tell you where to get the best French toast, the best burgers. And when I travel, I do my due diligence. I know where those burgers are. But it's nothing for me to not eat a burger. And this is something that comes up with skip loading a lot. People think, oh, you must eat this stuff all the time. I'll go 6 months without having a burger or pizza. I can't remember the last time I had pizza. French toast. I like those things, but if they're not in my plan and that's not going to benefit me at that time, I don't just go out and eat that stuff. That's just not something that I do. So if I were not training, I'd be probably a fat, unhealthy my blood markers would be all over the place. It'd be horrible. So how did I get through that knee injury? I literally was trial and error. I played with things. I'll tell you this. Don't ever go back to the antiquated version of the acronym RICE, because rest is horrible. It's absolutely, you want to keep that injury or not progress, just keep resting it. Now, I'm not saying not to rest. There are some times where you do have to rest for a period of time, but it's the movement that saved me. I don't care if it was ridiculous. I was using the carriage to do, what do you want to call them? Linear hack squats, I guess. Mm-hmm. I call them high-angled hack squats. I think we have 40 different names for it. And I had to switch my foot position to be able, and I just played with things. I wide foot position, narrow, and oddly, even though the damage to the cartilage was medial and anterior and medial, if I stayed more on the balls of my feet, it didn't hurt. An odd thing, but yet if I went too heavy, too quick, of course, mechanics are everything. And I'm a huge stickler for mechanics. Always have been, thankfully. It's part of longevity too. But as soon as there was a minor bit of waver from fatigue or something, then I could feel it and it would start to irritate. And this is based on inflammation. It's basically osteoarthritis when you're losing articular cartilage. Plus, it's good to know that there are compounds out there that can actually, you can regenerate cartilage, not articular cartilage, just the cartilage you don't want, like in your nose and in your ears, things like that. So I'm like, at first I thought, I'm good. Like I'll be able to rebuild a lot of cartilage. No, you're not getting that back. What you have to do is reduce the inflammation. When it's arthritic inflammation, that takes a while. And what I did was the more blood that I got in there with minimal and very, very light loads, it slowly started to help with the inflammation and just helped with recovery. Articular cartilage has arguably no blood supply. So, it's not something that is just going to, all of a sudden get better. Yes, if maybe I worked with someone who was sports specific with that type of situation, I may have rehabbed, maybe 6 months or a year earlier. I don't know. But I didn't have those connections down here. We lived in Colorado. We raised the kids for 21 years in Colorado. I had only been down here 3 or 4 months. I mean, I didn't even have a regular doctor until, 2 or 3 years ago, because if I needed something, I just went to urgent care, that type of thing. Not the best plan. I'm not advocating for it. But you get caught up in life and everything else, and you're like, yeah, I'm good. I haven't had to get a doctor yet. So I eventually just got through it. But again, it wasn't just the injury. Then you have that lagging doubt and you just think it's going to come back. Like, how could it be gone? I'll tell you this, to this day, I will not train legs without doing my ritual of 5 minutes of backwards incline treadmill. Mm-hmm. And I got that from the heels over toe, or toes over heels, heels over toes.
Yep, I know what you're talking about.
You know what I'm talking about? Knees over toes. I'm screwing this up bad. Yep. Yeah, I'm screwing this up bad. That actually helped me quite a bit. Then I spent about 3 minutes on the recumbent bike. And there are still 2 or 3 exercises that I refuse to do. The one that arguably made the most or caused the most damage was not an old school sissy squat. The old school sissy squats, you didn't use a piece of equipment for, Tom Platts, that sort of thing, back when sissy squats actually worked and were more effective. Now we use this piece of equipment to kind of lock into, and it's technically not a sissy squat, but that's what we call it. Here's the problem with that.
Shins trapped and... Yeah.
Exactly. Now, that's not inherently a bad exercise. Don't get me wrong. I'll tell you what's bad. The shitty ones where the roller that is in front of your foot and shin, like really at your ankle, is not adjustable. So it's too far out away from the pad. Mm-hmm. And like a dumbass, I used it. And I remember thinking when I got done, I'm like, man, that doesn't feel very good. It wasn't during the exercise, but when I got done, I thought it doesn't feel. The next morning I got up and I could barely bend my leg. So it didn't cause it, mind you. Remember, I had the torn glute, so I had favored that side for a long time, but I had never had knee injuries. Like 0 for 40 years. That's kind of unheard of. I kind of give credit to the fact that I was a catcher, baseball when I was young. And back then, you didn't just catch, a game every now and then like they do in the big leagues now. You're a utility player if you're a catcher these days. You caught every single game. If you played 6 games in a tournament on a weekend, if you were good, you caught every inning of every game. So I think that helped with the flexibility through the knees when I was younger. But like I said, I eventually got through it. And then, of course, you have that lagging or nagging thing in your brain that mental block that you have to get through even after the injury is done and gone and healed.
Well, it sounds like that mental block was almost what drove you to develop the process that you had to just make sure that it wouldn't happen again. So in a way, I'm sure that was something that was motivating, albeit motivating perhaps by fear. But the fact of the matter is you've pieced together via that trial and error as well how to be able to get back in there and do it. And it sounds cliche to say like movement is life or whatever that quote is, but I also agree that, you need to rest when you need to rest, but also you need to not just give up and you need to find a way.
Right.
So because of everything that you've done over the years, you were able to kind of piece together this routine that's gotten you back to where you are now. Now, speaking on longevity in the sport and speaking on longevity and health in general, you're pretty well known for your dietary practices. And we'll touch on skip loading here, but I want to go over what's kind of your general approach to diet in the off season as well as in contest prep or just getting lean in general. And what do you do that's different than the norm? What type of mistakes do you see being done in general in dietary practices as they are now, and kind of lead that all into how did you develop skip loading and what exactly is that?
Fair enough. I don't know that I do anything radically different other than, and I don't even think skip loading is radically different when it's broken down and people understand what it actually is. Because what it is not is going keto all week and then throwing down crappy food. I literally had to put out that video last week because it's just... And I'd been sitting on it for a while. I needed to get it out. So it was a good motivation to get it out. There's so much misinformation because I spoke about it so much 20 years ago that I felt like people got tired of hearing it. Like, oh, here comes Skip. He's going to talk about skip loading again. Oh my God. Kind of those, your friend who's having relationship problems and he calls you and you're like, I just want to shoot the shit with you, but I don't want to hear about how bad and how much of a bitch your wife is like 24/7 every time we talk. That's how I felt about it. So I assumed everybody knew about it, but time goes by, the next generation comes along, and they're not only like, what is skip loading? That sounds like the dumbest thing ever, but who's this Dinosaur Skip? This doesn't make it. And it was kind of like, whoa, okay, well, there's a lot of people who don't know. There's a lot of people who know me. There's a lot of people still that need that information. And it's not even really about, me staying, popular and everybody knowing me. It is from a business standpoint, relevant, staying relevant is huge, obviously. But it's more just it bothered me so bad that the information had been just so kind of screwed up that I'm just like, wow, that, I guess after information or a rumor or something that is said goes through, 20 people, it's bad enough. But if it goes through 100, it comes out in the end just looking like something completely different. So as far as regular diet, I don't do, my approach is in line with a lot of what the top trainers are doing these days. I'd like to think it was because I may have said this, 12, 15 years ago and people listened to me, but that's my ego. So I don't know if that's the case or not. But staying lean in the off season is, in my opinion, relatively lean or pretty much as lean as you can stay is better than just packing on as much weight as possible. And it's awful nuanced, but a lot of it comes down to insulin sensitivity. You're arguably going to gain more muscle when you're in an insulin sensitive state. And the fatter you get, it's just far more likely that you're not in that insulin sensitive state anymore. So we want to feed the machine. We want to keep the metabolism rolling, and we want to grow as efficiently and optimally as possible. What that does, though, is it creates an off season that you have to approach much like a prep diet. If you're going to go to Vegas for 2 weeks and just blow off your diet, or you're going to go see the kids in Milwaukee, I go and I train and I eat my food and I keep my food in my daughter's refrigerator, and they know that because they grew up with that. They're fine with that. But if I get sidetracked, then that throws the whole thing out of whack. So if you're going, it's one of those things that you have to kind of marry it. You have to be invested in the structure of your off season to be very, very similar. I say my off season is basically my prep. It's just less calories, or it's not much different. There might be less cardio. I'm not a big cardio guy in the off season. So there's not much difference. It's that structure. It's that regiment, that routine. It's just, it's a grind. It's a grind. And if it's not going to be 24/7, I don't think it's optimal. So many calories as you can take in and stay lean. As many calories as you can take in to add body weight, as long as you're not gaining body fat. If you start to gain body fat, you need to pull back. You need to remain insulin sensitive. And it's not, insulin sensitivity is funny because it needs to be understood that it's not only important for getting lean, but also for putting on tissue, quality tissue, without adding, no one wants to add 20 pounds of body fat to put on 4 pounds of muscle. I mean, that's just not a very efficient way to, or optimal way to look at it. So those methods and the way that I approach dieting aren't radically different than anybody else's. What could be argued that is radically different is a skip loading process is different in the sense that I believe that 1 or 2 high carb meals or a cheat meal is nowhere near as impactful metabolically as larger or more bolus intake of calories or carbs. And then, of course, monitoring blood sugar levels and things like that so that it's an optimal thing. And a lot of people don't want to do that. I mean, I've heard people say, well, I don't want to monitor blood sugar level. Okay, then just don't. But just know that it's not going to be optimal that way. I want things to be as optimized as possible, not only for myself, but that's what my clients come to me for. So I assume everybody wants that. If you don't want that, I totally get it. There's one other thing I do want to add that sometimes is missed with skip loading too is people assume that everyone who works with me skip loads or has to skip load. And that's not the case. The vast majority of my clients do. Hell, I think a lot of people come to me because of knowing about the method and that it's my method and they want to work with me. But if someone came to me and said, because I've had this happen, I have eating issues. Like I have emotional eating issues. Like if I start eating something, I can't stop. Will you work with me and will you work around the skip loading? Like, well, of course, but understand first that not everybody throws down cheeseburgers and malts and, shakes and things like that. Because some people do believe that that's the case. And I just put that video out on my YouTube channel, Team Skip YouTube channel, not even a week ago. And it's I would say it's taken off, but it's gotten a lot of attention for the reason that I think it's just been misunderstood, and I've been trying to promote it as much as I can. So if anybody has questions and wants to learn about it more in depth and the nuances of it, there's a lot of information. It's the most updated and current information on it.
Now, walk me through, how do you kind of set the table for a skip load? Because obviously we need to deplete some intramuscular glycogen and run a bit of a deficit getting into it. But how do we set the table for the perfect skip load? And then what does the skip load itself actually look like?
For the typical person, because obviously it's how someone will do it is kind of individualized too. But the typical person, start a cut diet. You might not skip load for at least 2 weeks. It might be 3, 4, it might be 5 weeks. We need to get to a level of depletion where we see, okay, you're starting to drag a little ass. Pumps aren't as good. Typical things that you would run into when you start to flatten out when you're on any other type of diet. But then another trainer may be like, okay, it's time for a high carb day. I look at it as my high carb days are typically skip loading. So we may start with one meal. And a lot of this is based on hunger because hunger doesn't get enough credit when it comes to someone being in a depleted state. That's number one. Number two is this. It also teaches people to respect and pay attention to their feedback and the connection between their brain and their stomach. So a lot of times when someone starts skip loading and they haven't done it before, they do that first meal and they typically overshoot it. What I'm looking for out of a client, excuse me, with the new mic, I don't know where the mute button is. I don't even know if I have one. It's probably on this Duo somewhere over here. I got to find it. They will overshoot that and they will be miserable. What we're looking for when I say based on hunger is you want to be full and you want to be satiated. And then just put the fork down. Okay, a lot of people will say, and I've been guilty of it, you have like 4 bites left of your burger. You're like, yeah, I already paid for it. I'm not going to let it go to waste. There are people in other countries, who would you would like to eat that food. No, That's just justifying more food. If you're done eating and you're full and you're satiated, just leave it. So essentially that's where the hunger part comes in. As you get more depleted, the hunger level obviously goes up. It's a leptin issue. There's a lot. And it's funny because when we first started the skip loading thing, 21 years ago now? Holy moly. There was no talk of leptin. Nobody knew anything about it. We weren't even, and understand, we don't know, there's a lot we don't know about ghrelin and leptin now. We're learning a lot of stuff, but we know this much about those interactions now. We're learning more with the GLPs and things like that, with the new peptides on the market. But there was no discussion of that. In fact, there weren't really any studies. That's why sometimes I'll laugh at the studies, because you don't need a study for something to be effective or work. Okay, I had my own study. I had done it with myself. I had done it with, over the years, 20 some years, how many clients had done it and been successful with it? Just the range of clients from, NFL athletes to soccer moms to, people who didn't train to bodybuilders in every single amateur and pro division have been successful with it. Are there times where they're not successful with it? Yes, but there's a caveat. It can still be successful, but it might not be that they can skip load as frequently. Typically, it's a 7-day cycle. I've tried many different cycles. It usually works that 98, 99% of the time, the 7-day cycle works. And then I can structure the rest of the diet around that 7-day cycle. It's more predictable. It just gives that, it's just a cycle in the system, I guess, that has worked over time. But there are those exceptions where, someone will have to load every, say, 14 days or 10 days or something like that. But it's very, very uncommon. So that first meal might look like something like this. And this is what's important. And I have moved to this over the years. It used to be when we first started skip loading, when I first started doing this, I ate Krispy Kremes. And here's the thing, it worked. I wasn't going to right then go, well, let me just dive into this method. I was getting ready for a show. So I did what worked, and it worked, and I was in insane condition. So that's kind of how it started. It didn't take long, though, for me to figure out I need to look at healthier options, because even though I'm eating 40, 42 meals in a week, and there's only one meal of Krispy Kremes, over time, this might not be healthy. Maybe I can use healthier foods and it will be just as beneficial from a metabolic standpoint. And as I started to shift into that, especially as I got older, the longevity type mind kicked in when I got shingles when I was 32 after a show. 34 after a show. When your immune system is so much in the shitter at 34 years old and you don't have cancer or HIV, you got to really take a hard look at your life and the stress and everything that's going on. At that time, shingles was not terribly common, which is weird because since then, we got college students who are just stressed about exams and they get it. So it's an impact though on your immune system that if you get to the point where you have shingles, you really have to go, I'm not in a good spot here, and I need to make sure that I don't get back to this spot, because if you're open for something like shingles, you're open to a wide array of shit. It's just not a good position to be in. So I did have that mental shift after I had that, and I wanted to be more healthy, and I just started looking into healthier options. So as an example, a client might start with something like, I'm big on poke bowls. I have my homemade poke bowl recipe, on my Team Skip YouTube channel, because I was spending $200 on a Sunday for 5 or 6 poke bowls. I'm like, this is ridiculously expensive. So I started ordering my meat from Wild Fork and making my own. And it was literally a fraction of even though it was high quality meat and I was getting everything else from Whole Foods and organic. I'm big on organic and that sort of thing. But organic won't have anything to do with your metabolism. It's not going to make you leaner, anything like that. It's just going to arguably, be healthy for you over the long run. So poke bowls, sushi's good. But when you say sushi, clients always find loopholes, right? So then they end up with 5 rolls that are tempura. And it's like, you got to have some common sense here. So over the years, I've had to put more parameters around it. It used to be, I'd say a meal. Or if I said you had 2 meals, you could have 2 meals for your skip load. Well, clients found out that if I have a massive meal in the morning and just eat myself miserable, then I wait 10 hours and come back and eat a massive meal again. And then after a few weeks, I'm like, well, this is weird. Like, you're not progressing. So I start digging into the details, asking them questions, and I find out they're just They're just going overboard. So I had to take those meals and actually put a time frame around so that you had to eat every 3 hours. That'll make you pace it a little bit more.
So now we have people eating within a given window, and these
Absolutely.
meals, whether they're a little bit more healthy / as opposed to unhealthy, they have to be nutrient dense, right? That's
Sure.
what we're going for, like calorically dense, I should say.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I want to make this point because it's very important. It still works to eat garbage. You can go and eat, you can eat burgers and fries. The bolus calories still will feed the metabolism. There are a few things that I want to point out, to my clients and tell them, I don't want you doing that because I want you to be healthier. And it's more important or more beneficial that those meals are carb dominant because you can benefit from the carbs outside of the metabolic kick. It's kind of, I say it's throwing gas on a fire. You're trying to, you have a campfire. I explained this in the video. You have a campfire that you got to burn for 20 weeks. You have this massive amount of wood that is basically body fat, and you need to burn it. You need to keep that fire burning. Every now and then you walk by and you throw gasoline on it because when you throw gasoline on it, you can burn more wood versus if you didn't walk by and throw gas on it. So that's kind of the analogy. And I'm really good with analogies because I can see things and understand things better that way. So I assume other people can as well. So those higher calories, whether it be the donuts or anything else, they still work. It's just, and they're going to work as long as you're not going overboard with it and you're not sucked into 4 days later, you have those cravings for the crap sugar that you just put in large amounts in your body that now your brain is saying, I want more of this. So the foods, like I said, sushi, typical things. It's not anything, bizarre. Sushi, poke, gnocchi or spaghetti. I'm big on gnocchi because it's made out of, potatoes. As I get older, I don't do terribly well with wheat. I used to poo-poo the whole gluten thing. Then I didn't eat any gluten on accident for 4 months. And I came back to it and I was having stomach cramps. Like, I don't understand why. Oh, I haven't had bread in 4 months. Oh, crap. So I had to take a look at that again. I thought, okay, I'm eating a little crow here. I'm going to have to backpedal on this a little bit. So gnocchi, spaghetti, every now and then, look, a Chipotle, burrito isn't a bad thing. There's Sweet Green. There's a lot of restaurants now that are actually really good foods, farm to table, arguably organic, things like that. Sweet Green is one of them. We have Pura Vida down here, which is great too. There are burritos that are made with salmon and quinoa and things. There are a lot. And even if you don't have a Pura Vida or you don't have a Sweet Green, you have something similar to that in every major city. It may not be that name, but they're doing something similar. So you got to do your due diligence and you got to find those foods that will fit within those parameters. Now, every now and then you go and you have pizza with your friends. You're not getting ready for a show. You're just in a cut phase. Work that into your skip load. It's not going to not work. It's just not as optimal as being predominantly carb heavy. And especially if you're getting into the use of insulin and things like that, then it becomes even more important. I don't count carbs and I don't give carb parameters to people, to clients for the skip load meals unless they're using insulin. When you're using insulin, you have to have those numbers to be very, very specific so that you can adjust that dosing and adjust the carb intake so that they match up. Otherwise, it's just a crapshoot. It's a guess.
Now, when utilizing an insulin with that, are we utilizing more of a fast acting like a Humalog or a Novolog and going meal by meal? Is there ever a place for Lantus on a skip load if that window is growing?
There is. It's a very, very good point. I'm glad you brought that up. Lantus works very, very well if you are to the point where you have a 3 or 4, I'd arguably say 4 or 5 meal, because again, they're 3 hours apart. So Lantus can work well. Here's the thing though. In my experience, I don't typically I will have some clients use it, but I typically don't have clients use it and then use Humalog on top of that unless they are basically veterans of insulin use. You start putting them together and then, you have to deal sometimes with overlap. Sometimes the Lantus, you can dose it every 12 hours. Other people, you got to dose it again so that you also don't want to come back after a skip load when it's really big and end up with, I had my blood sugar levels well controlled during the day, but then I woke up the next morning and I was fasted at, 110. or something like that. So, something like that, you may hit another dose of Lantus, at night, and you hit it in 12-hour intervals so that you don't wake up to that. Then there is the argument too, and sometimes this happens where even though you're back on your diet the next morning, your regular diet, and you're not skip loading, may still have some insulin use that morning to bring that fasted blood sugar level down. Ideally, it shouldn't be high in the morning because you would have managed those levels optimally during the day for the skip load. But sometimes they, like I say, there's overlap. There's just different things. You could be at a different level of depletion. Maybe you took a cruise week that week and you weren't as depleted. There are just a lot of variables in there. And that's why the method can be very, very successful without working with me. But you really have to understand and be able to assess your feedback honestly. And when hunger comes into play and you're dealing with skip loads that can, or a bolus of calories, sometimes we justify things.
Now,
I'm really depleted. I'm going to go out and I'm going to, this is going to, I've got my anniversary. So then, I have to pull clients back sometime and go, whoa, hold on a second. If you're just in a cut phase and you're going to go have dinner on Valentine's Day, totally cool. But if you're in a cut phase and you've got a deadline and you've committed to this goal, you got to tell your wife that you got different plans. You got to do one or the other. And I'm not telling them what to do because I'm never going to tell someone to go tell their wife that they're not taking them out. But I'm going to remind them of their goals, and then I'm going to leave the decision to them because ultimately those decisions are personal. You make that decision. But know that if you go against that, that is not favoring the goals and the commitment to those goals that you set out for, and you paid me a pretty good amount of money to make sure you were going to get there.
I think the good way to look at it, to look at the skip load in general, is it's a tool like anything else. You have to deploy a tool when the need for that tool comes up. If I need to screw into the wall, I'm not going to pick up a hammer just because I like to use the hammer. There needs to be justification for it. And I think that swings back into insulin as a tool. Insulin is a fascinating subject because I believe that it can be used incredibly safely and incredibly beneficially by not just competitive bodybuilders, but anybody looking to manipulate their physiology. Yep. But it's crazy because if you try and look it up online, more so now than ever, which is weird, it's looked at as this horrifying death dealer type product, whereas I try to compare it to almost like a shotgun. If you know how to use a gun and I give you a gun, you're safe, I'm safe, everybody around you is safe. Mm-hmm. If you have no idea how to use a gun and you're a complete jackass and I give you a gun, you better duck and cover because some gnarly shit's going to go down. And that's how I've always looked at it. What are your thoughts on insulin in general? Not based on there needs to be more education on it, because there certainly does. But if you know how to apply insulin, and if most importantly, you know how to measure the insulin, because I think that's where a lot of new people see problems. If you know how to measure it, know how to apply it, know how to look for it, is that something that can be used long-term with potentially even fewer side effects if it's off and on, or if it's more frequent use? Like, how would you deploy it, especially for the bodybuilder looking for longevity? Because I feel like it might be even more beneficial in the long term than anabolics, or at least abuse thereof.
Yeah, I didn't expect that question and this topic, but I got to tell you, it's a topic that I get pretty excited about. And my response is not going to make some people very happy. I don't think that if insulin use if you're going to use insulin and you're going to use it frequently and you're going to use it correctly, I'm going to go on record and say that I don't think it's going to feed a situation unless you have pre-existing issues. You're kind of, you could exacerbate some type of issue that you already have. But I don't think it's going to create any type of diabetic situation for people moving forward. I think that is going to be found out to be absolutely untrue. Just my opinion. And like I said, there will always be somebody who will vilify me for saying that. But I'm just being honest. The other thing that I think gets lost, I think there's a lot of misinformation on insulin, huge. Another thing that's lost that is surprising to me is that so many people, even people who've been in the game for a long time, do not believe that insulin can help you get lean. They equate using insulin with just literally like it's bulking and you're going to gain fat. It's bizarre to me because some of the people who say it are very knowledgeable people. It makes me just kind of scratch my head and go, you're smarter than that. I mean, I'm not the brightest star in the sky, but this to me is rudimentary shit. If you understand what insulin is doing, and maybe some people just don't want to say it because they feel like, especially if you're a trainer and you're popular, that you're somehow advocating and telling the industry to use more insulin. Insulin is gold. Use it. But it's pretty good shit if you know what you're doing, and combining it with growth hormone, and ultimately it comes down to, like you said, it's a tool. If I hand you a tool and you're going to build your dream home with it, and you're going to follow the instructions and you're going to pay attention, cool. If you're going to take the tool and smack yourself in the dick with the hammer, I didn't tell you to do that. So there is how you use that tool and the logic behind how you're going to, get to your goal and use those tools. And sometimes we give people too much credit, thinking that they are going to be sensical, and they just aren't. So you have to be careful as a trainer to make sure that the things that you are advising on, consulting on, and recommending, that you feel pretty confident that the client is able to manage those things and respect the tools that they're using to be able to monitor. I tell you who's bad for insulin use is honestly the veterans. There's no one who is more complacent with insulin than a veteran to say, well, I've used the insulin for so long that I know what my blood sugar levels are. What? I've been sitting fine, and I expect my blood sugar level to be somewhere, and I've gone 10 minutes longer than usual in a conversation, or I stop to get gas after I leave the gym, and I get home and I'm at a 42. There are some times where it was an arm workout on a Friday, but it was later in the week, so I was more depleted. But it wasn't after a leg workout. It wasn't something. You have to be so hypervigilant, and I am. Until you take that, you become a little complacent. You're like, oh, I know I need to get home to my nutrition, and if I get there on everything will be fine. I always have backup carbs and nutrition with me just in case. So if I do start to feel that, and it's what it feels like, it's that heavy sweating and like almost like a whoa, like that's fast. You're on a slide. But to say the veterans are the ones that will. The old story is, go to the mailbox to get your mail and then, be passed out halfway back to your door. It's not the newbies. The newbies will take, 3 units, and they'll swear they're going hypo and they're checking their blood sugar every 2 minutes. And good for them, because they're aware and they're paying attention. But always pay attention. Always don't ever become complacent using a compound like that.
It's just that the fear that's being just perpetuated by it is baffling to me, because we live in a world where people still think it's cool to take a gram of Tren a week, but they think that some Humalog or some Lantus is going to kill them instantly. And technically, I guess it's going to kill you instantly before that gram of Tren will. Nobody's going to inject a bunch of cc's of Tren and pass out. Probably, but it's that misinformation on application. And I always thought it was that generally in like the anabolic journey of people, if you want to give it a really lame name, is people start with like a test booster, then they move on to probably like an oral, like a D-ball, then they move, if people even take D-ball anymore, then they move on to a testosterone, then they move on to an exotic, then they usually move on to growth hormone because growth hormone's less scary, then finally they graduate to insulin, and then they measure the insulin the same way they measured the growth hormone, because they draw to the 30 for 3 units of growth hormone, and they think that's 3 units of insulin, they bang 30, they take 30 grams of carbs, and then all of a sudden, why am I lightheaded? Why am I in the cold sweats? Why am I whatever? So I've done it too.
I did it. Yeah, I did it. I was transparent about it 20 years ago, and I got destroyed for it. But my point of being transparent about it was, if I could do it, I felt like someone. It's a relatively easy mistake to make, even though I admit that it's kind of foolish. But it's still an easy. And I've had clients go, oh, okay, I would have done that. I'm glad you told me. I mean, I have marks on those insulin pins saying, this is what this is. This is with arrows, just so that they know. And I know there are plenty who say, oh yeah, I knew that, when they may not have. So there's that. Just a little side note, but about 4 weeks ago, Yeah, roughly 4 weeks ago. I did an interview on Court TV with Vinny. I forget the guy's last name, but he does that 2.5 hour show every night. It's like 9 to 11 or 8 to 10. Anyway, it was on the case of the wife who allegedly killed her husband with insulin. She had been convicted of a Ponzi scheme, had ripped off so many people for millions of dollars. He was going to find out or something because he didn't know the role that she played in. And anyway, they wanted to talk about insulin and bodybuilding because they were surprised that that was even a thing. So I went on with a doctor of pathology, and they were running a little bit behind. I was supposed to be on 10, 12 minutes. I think I was only on maybe 4 or 5, if that. And then they went more with the doctor, which is good because when you're sitting there with a doctor of pathology on a television show, that the vast majority of listeners are old white people, they're going to side with the doctor long before they side with the meathead who's saying that insulin is used, quite a bit these days, and it's grown in popularity over the last, 10 years or so. But it was an interesting experience. She ended up being convicted of it. Whether she actually did that, I mean, his blood sugar level when they did the autopsy was like 21. I don't know. It was pretty ridiculously low. But then the questions were like, God, was he sleeping? Did she knock him out with something else first? Because like, how do you get that much in, and how much insulin would it take? Right. 300 units, 3 mil. I always said, jokingly, but a half truth, if I was ever diagnosed terminally, maybe I'd put 3 mil in my neck and go to sleep and not wake up. It would be a better way to go than terminal cancer. Don't know if I'd ever have the balls to do that. But in saying that, I'd always accepted that insulin at some level can put you into insulin-induced coma, and you're going to die if no one gets to you because your blood sugar, you're just going to essentially just, starve your brain of glucose. So they said that was the cause of death.
It's hard to determine whether or not that's even possible because, how do you administer that? Like you said, how does the person not notice? Were they unconscious first? Were they rendered unconscious with something that would keep them from waking up? Because that technically should wake you up in a craving to get food. There's 1,000 things that you can factor in. I just think it's so fascinating because, first of all, it's a fascinating product physiologically. And it's also fascinating to look at it through the psychology of other people, because we had maybe 10, 15 years ago, people talking about how insulin's overrated because people looked at it as though it was the missing link, the game changer, the thing that would turn you into Big Ramy or Ronnie Coleman, when clearly that's not necessarily the case. But now we have people looking at it and they're kind of underrating what it can do if you understand how it works and how to manipulate glycogen storage with it and everything like that. What other substances, without turning this into an entire PED discussion, what other substances do you think aren't getting their due credit for how effective they are because they might be being overlooked for the latest peptide innovation or whatever everybody else is taking now?
I'm slow to jump on the peptide wagon, only because I still say that the original peptides, as far as growth hormones, secretagogues, things like that, they only really came about because GH was not as readily available as it is now, and it's nowhere near. I mean, it's just so inexpensive to get it. So I always say, I'm like, GH is readily available. You can get it pretty much everywhere, and you can get it for a pretty good price. So why would you bother with the peptides? That's my, I'm not saying that that's my opinion on it. But you get into these other peptides, and there's so many of them that a lot of times, and I do this with supplements too, I have too much to do in a day. I have clients to keep track of. I've got podcasts. I've got writing articles. I've got too much to do. So if I checked on every new peptide, I would have no time in the day, and only 1 out of 100, arbitrary number to make my point, really ends up that the industry pays much attention to it. So as an example, I have not messed with SLU. I don't know. I've had some friends who say that it works great. I've had other friends and peers say that, I will tell you this. The most impressive compound that I have seen, probably in the last 15 years, is Retta. Retatrutide is, I'm sorry, but I only went to try it because I've had so many people asking me about it. One of my things has always been, I will never opine or advise on a compound that I have never used. I think that's irresponsible and unfair. So I thought, you know what? I have a few more months until I start prep. I'll give it a shot. I'll take it for 30 days. I'll see what happens. Didn't really feel anything from it. Figured, I'm going to recomp a little bit if it works. Let's just see. Let's just see what happens. And I started at 0.25 milligrams a day, 1.75 milligram a week, relatively low dose. When they were saying, start at 4 milligram or 3 milligram, I'm like, nah, just put this a little bit in and we'll see what happens. And I had heard what happened with Chase, his response to it. So I thought, well, there may be something to it. Chase, he's not a bullshitter. He's a pretty straight up dude. First 10 days or something, I thought, okay, I'm down a couple pounds. I'd be down a couple pounds anyway. I lost 16.6 or 16.4 pounds in 30 days. But check this out. This is even more, makes it more dramatic. I had increased in those 30 days my carbs twice because I felt like I was just losing too fast. Yet my strength was going through the roof. I was only on TRT. Like I'm looking at it going, like, how can this be? I remember at the 29th day, I hit what was not a PR. When I say PR, it was a PR on legs that I hadn't hit in over a year. I hadn't hit it at 235 and I was 218 and I was on gear at 235. Very, very weird. And no cardio because like I said earlier, I'm a zero cardio guy in the off season. I try to limit it as much as I can, even during a prep, because it tends to drive me into the ground. My recovery, especially for legs, goes to crap. Anyway, this is just remarkable shit. Like I couldn't believe to say cravings or anything else, I don't really notice. I didn't have any cravings, but I wouldn't have had any cravings at that time because I was over the next month. I did another 30 days after that. And I had to increase my carbs 4 times in 4 weeks. Mm-hmm. I am now taking in, I stayed on the dose. I figured I haven't touched it. I haven't decreased it. I haven't increased it. Let's see, December, January, February. It's been 3 months. And I am at my all-time highest caloric intake for being, I'm not shredded by any means at 230, 231, but I have not been in this condition at 230. And I just started a cycle 2 weeks ago.
I can attest to that. It's an amazing compound. Mm-hmm. I started at about the same time as you. I started in mid-December, and I've been on it ever since. Now I've titrated up to 4 milligrams a week, and then last week I bumped up to 6 milligrams. Just because I do want to test it out and see what happens a little bit. I don't get much of a appetite blunting effect on it, so a little bit. I can't, I'll get fuller quicker, but it's that glucagon GIP pathway that's just consistently just moving everything where it needs to go and sparing glycogen. And I'm running it with HRT and 6 units of growth hormone, and that's it. And nice. I feel better than I've felt in a long time. My performance is through the roof, and I look like I'm starting to cut for a show, and I haven't competed since 2020, and I really have no intention to, but it's a fantastic compound, and it's been nothing but positives. I've run blood work on it twice. My inflammation is non-existent, and everything is good. It's actually improved my kidney markers from pretty good to pretty damn good. So
that's crazy.
Amazing compound. I just attended a seminar this past weekend, a wellness and biohacking seminar in Palm Harbor, and there was a guest lecturer on it. He's actually Dr. Rudy. I don't want to massacre his last name, but he'll be on the podcast in an episode soon. And he called it the most important, or GLPs in general, called them the most important breakthroughs in American medication since penicillin, which is a bold statement. But I don't disagree.
And I feel better him making that statement than me. But I honestly, this is game changer shit, not just for the industry, because what's going to happen in the industry is we're going to have people on stage that otherwise wouldn't be on stage, and they're going to be kicking ass because there are a lot of really good physiques and gyms all over the country who don't have the ability to be able to diet and get into the condition they need to get on stage. These things can help them to do that. So there's going to, in my opinion, over the next couple of years, we're going to see, I don't want to say a massive influx, but there's going to be a lot of new physiques on stage that are going to be killing it. Now you get into the mainstream, this is just game-changing shit for the health industry. I don't know what's going to happen, but I predict that it's going to be on a massive scale where this could potentially decrease everything, not obviously obesity, but heart disease, all this shit. It could arguably help even with drinking and alcohol-related health, because not only do these GLPs work from a food standpoint, but they tend to blunt the desire for as much alcohol or alcohol in general. There's just a lot to unravel. I laughed and told my wife, I'm like, Lilly stock hasn't gone up enough, 400% since 2020. But I'm like, I want to buy stock in Lilly. Lilly already is talking about a compound with a fourth mimetic. You know what it is, right? Isn't that crazy? It's like, oh, we're ahead of the game on that one because it's IGF. I mean, okay, a lot of us are already doing, or at least going down that, with GH and increasing IGF levels. I laughed and said, there's got to be somebody in Lilly that is very influential that has some sort of bodybuilding background.
I'm sure there must be. There must be, because these new innovations keep coming out. Now we're exploring the amylin pathway, and we're throwing that in with cagrilintide and all these newer ones that they're experimenting with right now. It's just from a chemistry standpoint, and then from a selfish bodybuilding standpoint, it's amazing, because it's opening up so many doors, but also for health and longevity in general. I'm sure this is a topic we could go into for hours in and of itself, and segueing into performance enhancers. And I would love to have you back on to discuss those in a little bit more depth in the future. In the meantime, just to wrap up this conversation, where can people get a hold of you? Because I'm sure a lot of people are going to want to dive more into this concept of skip loading, looking into insulin from a credible source that knows how to use it safely, dieting and competing and training with that longevity in mind. Where can people get a hold of you, Skip?
The easiest is teamskip.com. It has all my, Instagram, email, everything else, all those contacts there, Facebook and everything else. So teamskip.com, it also has obviously a lot of background on what you can expect from me and what my history is and that sort of thing. But also have new merch in the Team Skip store. After I think it's only been about 2 weeks. My box just arrived yesterday with very unique colors. And I always got to match. But yeah, teamskip.com. And I'd be happy to anybody who may be interested and wants to talk about, working with me, feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to discuss it. And one thing to point out is this: some people do think, well, he only works with a lot of competitors. That's old school stuff. I actually enjoy, quite frankly, the non-competitors. I enjoy the competitors, but competitors can be competitors. They're a different breed. So,
they're different, yeah.
Yeah, if you're in the older demographic, much like myself, people in the older demographic tend to gravitate towards me because of my history with injuries, and we're kind of the same age, we're relatable, things like that. I can help you to stay, relatively injury-free, train around or through injuries, things like that. There's a lot there. So if you are a part of the older demographic, I call it the elite FTS demographic. Feel free to reach out to, because I'd be happy to discuss working with anyone. Right, frankly, if you're committed, that's all that really matters to me. You don't have to be some high-profile guy that's going to get me a lot of likes and follows on social media.
Awesome. Now, regardless of what platform you're watching this on, all of those links will be in the bio below. Hit up Skip and ask him any questions that you might have. If you're thinking about working with him, I can't recommend this guy enough. This guy's been a wealth of knowledge in the industry for an incredibly long time. I don't think you're going to present him with anything that he hasn't seen, dealt with, or fixed before. So hit up Skip and tune in next week to the DDT Method Podcast.